Good morning. Great to see everybody this morning. It's good to be back in town from our travels. Appreciate Paul presenting this to us. We just want to make sure you guys are aware where we are as we continue forward as a family. My only 2 cents to add to that is, hey guys, we are a family. We kind of work together. We do that. We're doing life together. Giving is part of our worship to God. It's also part of our participation in community. And so, my urging is for all of us just to simply do our part where we are. I firmly believe, my prayer is that by the end of the year, we will be where we need to be kind of to be able to go into 2024 in a very positive way. And so I believe that. I know that if we just communicate well with you guys, let you know where we are, you guys are awesome. You will come through, and I believe that. So thank you, Paul, for putting that before us today. A couple other quick announcements before we jump into our sermon this morning. Wanted to let you know, well, actually, we got the slide here. If you want to contribute or set up contribution, you can do that through that slide. Also, announcements and all the ways to sign up for stuff is there. We have our men's retreat coming up October 20th through 22nd. You can sign up there. We also have a new teacher rotation coming up. We've almost filled it out, but we do still have a few needs, okay? And the way we do our teachers is we do 6 months at a time, and it's a 3 month out of the 6. So like you serve either September, November, January, or October, December, February. Does that make sense? And so we're asking for 3 months, and we do have still needs in our 4th grade class, our 5th and 6th grade class, and for some substitutes. So that means you're just kind of available if somebody's missing that day, you could fill in. The new rotation starts next week. So if we don't fill specifically the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classes, then there will be no classes next week for those age groups. So please, if you have feeling the prompting of the Spirit and just hoping that somebody else got prompted before you, probably not going to happen. Go ahead and follow the prompting and sign on up. Thank you so much. Amen. In fact, I was talking to somebody already. I think in the fellowship, somebody was already signing up. So I know we'll get there, but please let's help out our children's ministry. Amen. I also want to say sad day in the sense that Joel Rivera is his last Sunday. He's heading, following his family to Tampa, Florida, just in time for looks like a hurricane or something. So good luck to you. We certainly don't have that problem here. I think I might trade our grout for a hurricane right now. But anyway, brother, we love you. Godspeed to you and your family. And I know you guys will be just a great part of the fellowship there. We'll be praying for you guys. Look forward to you guys coming and visiting. So, and then also I don't remember if I introduced them or not, but I want to make sure you guys got to meet Waldo and Lori Swoboda. They're over here on the side. They've been a part of our tribe ministry for a long time, but they've moved up north side, so they're here with us now. So excited to have you guys. So make sure you give them a hug and welcome them to our north side family. Okay. This has been, kind of all the announcements aside and all that, it's been kind of an interesting and difficult few weeks. I had sort of this plan of what I wanted to talk about this morning, and I try to plan ahead a little bit. And today just didn't feel like the day to kind of talk about the things I had planned. So I'm going a little bit sort of off script, if you will. I know a number of our members have friends in the Hawaiian Islands of Maui. I know it's been a few weeks since all that happened, but have watched friends lose everything, and that's hard. I know we've all, some of us, a vacation there, and you kind of watch in horror as all these things happen. And as the news comes in, and more people missing and presumed dead, it's heavy. We've had dear friends, some of our congregation, the Thor's neighbors. The Schillers, who many of us know very well, lost their home in a fire. Thank God their lives were protected, but it's heavy. Most difficult, as most of you know by now, our brother Lance Tracy lost his battle with pancreatic cancer on Tuesday afternoon. And so, and Angela and I were just in Estonia, where we're seeing friends and connecting with many who are still dealing with the tragic fallout of the war in Ukraine. And then I wake up this morning to news that what seems to be another racially motivated shooting in Jacksonville, Florida, and you kind of go, whew. I don't know if anybody else feels this. Maybe, I know you do. It's a lot to process. And these aren't just news items because for many of us, it's personal, if not all of us. There are many other things, that are happening around us, but these things weigh heavy. And so as I thought about today's sermon, I thought it might be helpful to seek some perspective from Jesus. And the passage that came to mind is a familiar one perhaps to many of us, and it's in John chapter 11. And I want us to go ahead and turn over there. We're going to spend our morning in John 11. And to give you a little bit of context, the Gospel of John is it's an expertly crafted document. Okay, those of you guys who are English majors should love the Gospel of John because he crafts this thing really well. And so he has this part of John where he does 7 signs where Jesus performed 7 miracles. The first of which was turning the water into wine at a wedding. The last of which is raising Lazarus from the dead. Okay, and that's what we're going to be looking at here this morning in verse 1. It says, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days, and then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. Okay, let me stop this right there for a quick moment. It's kind of interesting, right? Jesus gets this news that, hey, your friend Lazarus is sick, and does he drop everything and go? No, in fact, it almost seems like it's paradoxical, right? Jesus really loved these guys, so he waited 2 more days. But I think that gives us our first clue, what we're going to discover here in a few moments, about Jesus' absence. Because Jesus was not there when Lazarus died. And Mary and Martha both point that out as we read later on in the text. Let's continue reading. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. After he said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, the twin, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that is, that we may die with him. And so there's this lack of understanding. Jesus, okay, let's go. And he's trying to explain to his disciples what's going to happen. And of course, they didn't quite understand fully, as often is the case. And Thomas, who it really kind of, I don't know if it was a moment of boldness or maybe perhaps just a fatalist attitude, says, okay, well, hey, you know what? If you're going, we're going with you, and we're all going to die there. That's basically kind of the spirit that he had. Because Bethany was located near Jerusalem, which is where Jesus was having all kinds of issues with the religious leaders. Verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again at the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been with Mary were in the house comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out. They followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." I mean, this is a remarkable story. Remarkable. And Jesus here, it's so rich. I mean, the storytelling and how John tells us the story is quite amazing, and all the little details and nuances, and there's so much more that I could probably talk about in one sermon. But I think it's notable that Martha's first words to Jesus when he arrives are, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." And it takes us back to that initial sort of moment when Jesus, hears the news and delays 2 days. You're like, why did he do that? Why was he absent? And Mary herself repeats the same refrain. She says, "Jesus, if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened." You ever felt that way? You ever felt that way? It's like, "Jesus, if you'd just been here, this would not have happened." We pray. We wait. We know Jesus is able, but it doesn't seem sometimes that he shows up, at least not on time. But for Martha, you look at her response, and it wasn't even really a faith issue. It was actually kind of, this is my kind of comical reading, but I read this picture, and Martha says in verse 24, I know he'll raise again at the resurrection. Jesus says to her, "I am the resurrection." And then she says, "Yeah, I believe you're the Messiah." He goes, "Do you believe this?" She's like, "Yeah, I believe you're the Messiah." Like, she didn't know how to answer that question. And then she goes and gets married. Remember who was sitting with Jesus listening to him, in her prior story? Mary. Who was in the kitchen doing the dishes? Martha. Martha's like, "Okay, I'm overwhelmed right now. I'm not even sure how to even answer this question, so let me go get Mary." And that's kind of what she does, right? But both of them say the same things. Like, "Jesus, you weren't here when I thought you should have been here." They wouldn't say that exactly because they don't want to offend. But the truth is, if you had been here, this would not have happened. I feel like we feel that is so true to life sometimes, is it not? Like, man, if you had just been here, where were you? But we would never say that because, I don't want to make it worse. Psalm 22, actually a psalm that Jesus uttered on the cross, says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest." It's a psalm. Now, you read the rest of it. It's a very long psalm. You get to the end, and he's like, "Man, God's going to have a victory and all this." And there's movement back towards God, but there's this moment of realization and acceptance that, man, I'm disappointed. It didn't work out the way I thought. And Martha's statement, "I know that even now God will give you what you ask for," didn't necessarily have resurrection in view. It was more of just a an unwavering statement of faith in spite of Jesus' absence. Like, I know you got this somehow, even though I didn't feel you being here. And I think that disappointment and sadness and absence are part of the spiritual journey, isn't it? I think any of us who've been Christians for any length of time, we've experienced moments of sadness, moments of what was felt or perceived as God's absence. Is God really absent? No. But we feel that way. And I think that was what Martha and Mary were experiencing. And so what did Jesus say to them? What was his response to them in this atmosphere? Okay, because remember, all this conversation is going on, and Lazarus is gone. And so Martha, Jesus offers hope and perspective because he tells her, I am the resurrection and the life. And really, that's the point of the entire story. There's a rhetorical device called a chiasm. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but I'll show you a little diagram. This will help you understand because it's hard for me to explain it. So when they write, when writers, this is a writing technique, and so it's kind of this technique where you start with something, then you go to something else, and there's a middle, and then it kind of goes, and there's a parallelism to it, right? So in other words, Jesus' first response to Lazarus was to delay the journey. So the response to Lazarus. Then he has a dialogue, first with Martha. Then he says, I'm the resurrection and the life. Then he has a dialogue with Mary, and then he has a second response to Lazarus. Does that make sense? And so when they use this rhetorical technique, they do it because they're making a point about what is in the middle. So the middle is the main idea. And so in the story of Lazarus, Jesus being the resurrection and the life is the main idea. That's the answer. And when he says to Martha, hey, listen, I am the resurrection and the life, he is giving her hope. He's giving her perspective in a very difficult moment. To Mary, Jesus offered compassion. Interesting, is that the word, the language that's used, it says, come and see, Lord. Hey, where is he laid? Come and see, Lord. That come and see is actually used several other times in the New Testament. Do you know when it's used? As a call to discipleship. Come and see. John chapter 1. He says, come and, Jesus said, they're like, hey, want to follow Jesus? Where are you staying? Hey, come and see. John 1:46, Philip says to Nathanael, come and see Jesus. John chapter 4 and verse 29, the Samaritan woman says, come and see the man who told me everything. So there's this phrase actually has some weight to it, right? It's like, come and see. And so, it's interesting to me because I think we have this expectation of how life goes when we initially come and see Jesus. We start off in a world, following Jesus and as disciples and go, hey, you know what? I'm going to follow Jesus. He's awesome. He's got all the answers. And if I follow him and stick with him, everything's going to be fantastic. But then there's a moment when we ask him to come and see. Come and see. This didn't go the way I thought. Come and see. Many commentators believe that the Gospel of John is addressing the church in a time of great persecution and disappointment, that Jesus had not yet returned. And so even there are echoes of this as John writes his Gospel. Perhaps the early readers of John would have confused Jesus' perceived absence with his real absence. And so therefore John is writing to encourage them. I don't know that to be a fact, but it certainly seems to fit the bill. But Jesus' response to Mary was compassion. He goes to see. And in this really interesting moment, Jesus, it says that he was moved and that he wept. That's like the simplest Bible verse in the entire Bible, right? I remember when I was a kid, it's like, you got any Bible verse memorized? Yep, John 11:35. Jesus wept. I got that one down. Maybe that was the first one you memorized too. Pick the shortest and go with it, right? But it's profound. Jesus weeps with them. But he doesn't raise Lazarus right away. In fact, if you read the text, it seems almost as if he goes with them to the tomb, mourns, cries with them, And then it says later on, the way it's worded, it seems as if he goes back a second time. So Jesus okay, let's be real. Jesus went to Bethany with the intent of raising Lazarus from the dead. But he delays 2 days. He allows the absence. He cries with him. He mourns with him. And he does it for a while. It's not like he rides in and goes, hey guys, I'm here. You know what? Everybody circle up. Lazarus, come on, man. I mean, he didn't do that. He let them, he sat with them in their moment of pain. Jesus felt with her. He wept with them. He was deeply moved, even though he knew full well what was about to happen. So to Mary, he offers compassion, and to Lazarus, he offered life. You know, interesting, we never hear really the story from Lazarus' perspective. I would love to hear Lazarus' point of view of this whole thing. All right, am I right? I got two questions when I go to heaven that I'm building a list. My first one is to Jesus. Hey, when did you know you were Jesus? I'm curious about that. But secondly, I want to go find Lazarus. I'm like, yo, bro, I need to hear, what was that like? I just have to know. But we don't know. He doesn't tell us that part of the story. But by raising Lazarus from the dead, Jesus signed his own death warrant. Because it goes on in verse 53, and if you read the rest of the text, the Jewish leaders become very concerned. Because now you got this guy who Jesus rose from the dead running around talking about it. And it says in verse 53, so from that day on, they plotted to take his life. And so Jesus, by raising Lazarus from the dead, was essentially giving his life in exchange. Though it was not perhaps apparent to everyone else at the time. But I think this is such a beautiful picture of our own salvation, isn't it? Because like Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, we walk with Jesus. We listen to him. We follow him. We serve him. And yet at times there are incomprehensible moments where we are troubled by his absence. We know he's capable of making everything right, but we don't see the way forward. And the story of Lazarus is a reminder that even in those moments of absence, Jesus is still the resurrection and the life. And that we have hope beyond our own momentary struggles. But also that hope cost him everything. You see, this story is such a beautiful picture, I think, of not just sort of the salvation side of what Jesus did for us, but the larger picture of our spiritual journeys. The ups and downs, the disappointments, the encouragements, but ultimately the life, the resurrection that is ours because of Jesus. So we're going to take communion here in just a moment. As we reflect on this, I want us to reflect on Jesus and reflect on maybe perhaps where we have perceived absence in our own lives. I think it's okay to say that, to pray it, voice it. But then it takes us back to God, it takes us back to Jesus, because we know that ultimately, as this Martha said, Martha's like, you know what? I don't get it. Jesus, you've been here, but I do know you are the Messiah. Sometimes that's what we have. You are the Messiah. And the answer to the story, and the main point, is that Jesus is the resurrection. Jesus is the life. And so as we reflect on that this morning, let's reflect on our own lives and really what Jesus' sacrifice means to each one of us as we take the bread and the cup. Let's pray. God in heaven, thank you. Thank you so much for your grace towards us. God, we at times so desperately feel your absence, and it hurts. But God, when we meditate and reflect on your word, when we think about you, God, we turn our hearts and minds are turned back to you, God, because we know that you are the resurrection and the life. And God, I pray that we would draw great encouragement and strength from that. God, I pray that, God, we know, God, we believe that Jesus is your son, that he died for, he willingly chose to die for us. God, so that we could have life and have it to the full. And God, we are amazingly grateful for that. I pray now as we take the bread and the cup that we would reflect on these things, God, that we would draw close to you.